Namaste. Very good to see you, and thank you so much for wanting to interview me on this very important topic, the topic of how to raise children in a proper way, in a healthy way, in accordance with Vedic spirituality, Vedic philosophy, etc. A very, very important topic, and again, thank you so much for offering to interview me on this topic. That is a very good beginning, actually. Why even have children? That's a very good start, actually, and actually a very good question. Because increasingly, interestingly, it's a question that more and more people ask today. As we know, there are even couples who choose, not to have children, and individuals who choose not to have children. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that. It is a matter of free choice whether someone does or does not have children. But overall, of course, there are tremendous benefits in having children, and this is true both naturally, that is biologically, but also socially, spiritually, etc. When, of course, you have the coming together of a man and woman in a relationship, and then hopefully a marriage, a blissful marriage, of course, the idea is that the reason why there even is marriage and the coming together naturally of a man and a woman is certainly not merely to fulfill the function of making those two individuals happy, which of course it does romantically and in so many different ways. But the actual fruition of an actual marriage should be children, should be with the idea of having children, and that for several different reasons. First, of course, there's the social reason. Humanity won't continue unless there are children. I mean, that's just kind of a given. Every single species on Earth makes it a biological imperative to have offspring, to have children. And in that way, of course, the species continues. I mean, we know this with every single species of life. This is certainly the case for human beings as well, and always has been. This is why we indeed have natural coupling that occurs, natural relationships that occur, again, between men and women all throughout history, is with the idea of there being children. The other thing is, for the couple involved, it is not just the natural fruition of their coming together, but more than this, it is a fulfillment also that is felt by both parties, by the mother and the father, when a child is born. That child is seen as the fulfillment of the love and the bond of those two individuals for one another. To come together and to see an actual offspring, an actual son or daughter who is born, who is symbolic in a very strong way of, again, the love of those two people for each other, is something that is extremely powerful. More, even psychologically, it's very good for the individuals in the couple. The reason being that, as is naturally the case, when you have two individuals, two adults who are together in marriage, of course, there tends to be still a little bit of self-centeredness. People still tend to get married somewhat young, so they're just coming out of that teenager stage, that stage in their early 20s, etc., where there's still a little bit of self-involvement that's there. Well, now with the birth of a child, now suddenly these two individuals understand that now they need to focus on another. They need to focus on another person, not just themselves. And spiritually speaking, this is something that is of tremendous importance, because now, rather than just focusing on themselves as a couple and their needs, they have this beautiful little being who is dependent on them. And now they can't just think about, oh, me and my needs. Now they have to think about the needs of this little child. And spiritually speaking, this is something that is truly beneficial because, again, it takes the focus away from the self-centeredness and focuses it on other. Focuses it on another being who is completely dependent upon them. Now there's no choice but to not be selfish. Now there's no choice but to not be self-involved, self-absorbed. So again, for this reason, so many reasons, it is truly beneficial. It's wonderful to have a child if that's possible. And again, it's not that everyone has to. There are some people who don't, and that's perfectly fine. But under optimal circumstances, this is good in every way for everyone involved. Now, as far as the role of the man and the woman, well, of course, The roles are different, but at the same time cooperative. This is the thing that is of importance to understand when it comes to relationship and marriage between a man and a woman, is to, on the one hand, understand that the roles of the two individuals, they're not equal and the same, but rather they are cooperative. They're meant to complement one another. So, of course, there are different roles. We know this again, even biologically. The father is not going to be the one who's impregnated and who is having that child within them for 9 months. It's the woman who does that, and it's the man who tends to be the protector. This is true all throughout nature. Again, with every species, we see this. We see this in the wild. We see that whether we're talking about lions or tigers or wolves or any kind of being like this, the mother is pregnant and thus is vulnerable and has to take it easy. She has to preserve her energy, etc. She has to make sure that that fetus that's there within her, that baby within her, is getting all the nutrients that the baby needs. So what happens? We see that the male, that the father, of course, is very protective. And as the female is lying down and resting, it is the male who makes sure that the female is not harmed in any way and that the female has everything that she needs as far as nutrients, as far as love, as far as nurturing, etc. So the husband nurtures the wife while the wife nurtures the baby within her womb. So those are the roles, of course, as the baby is still within the womb. And even after the baby is born, for some time afterwards, of course, this continues. Because it is indeed the mother who is the primary caretaker. After the baby is born, it's still the mother who has to breastfeed the baby, take care of the baby, watch for the baby, with the cooperation of the father, certainly. But again, it's mostly the mother who has that very deep, very close bond with that baby. And again, the father is the provider and the protector of both the mother and the baby, this new family, this new wonderful family that he has. So that's the role that they both have, where again, they're not equal, they have different tasks, but they're cooperative. They're complementary tasks where they cooperate with each other in a very beautiful way, recognizing the different tasks that they have as man, as woman, as mother, as father, etc. They understand the tasks are different, but they are on the same page. They're working together. So that's the idea. Certainly, another very good question. There are several ways, actually. The primary one of which is, indeed, is the child growing maximally in all of the positive attributes that a properly functioning human being should have? So, in other words, it's not just one thing, it's several things combined. Throughout the life of the child, as the child is growing, as the child is a baby, then a toddler, then even older than that, up to adulthood, is the child actually happy and joyful? Something very important. Is the child wise? Is the child a child who from a very early age is encouraged to be intelligent and wise and discerning and has discernment, discrimination, etc.? Is the child someone who is very curious about the world and in a very safe yet very positively curious sort of way? Is the child someone who interacts with other people in a very good way, both with the parents, but then other children, etc.? Is the child someone who, when the time is right, can follow etiquette and rules of etiquette? So, very important. Is the child courteous? Does the child know to say yes, no, thank you, please, etc.? All of these things. Yes, and on like this. Is the child someone who is ethical and knows the difference between right and wrong, knows the difference between why it's wrong to lie, why it is good to tell the truth, why it is wrong to steal, why it is good to be giving, etc. So all of these ethical principles. And of course, the child's grasp of all these things that I mentioned and many others that I haven't mentioned will of course deepen in time. But the important thing is that the child has to have the ability to manifest all of these positive attributes as early as possible. And in fact, if anything, we've seen, and I've seen this myself, that if a child is not encouraged to have all these positive attributes as early as possible, to then change their behavior when they're older is a challenge. It's very, very difficult. And this is a challenge that so many people have, that early on they don't understand that, yes, they as parents need to be examples. They need to teach their children proper behavior, proper thoughts, etc. And they often don't do this, and then afterwards the child becomes a problem child. The child will have tantrums, the child will not listen, the child will be disrespectful, etc. And by the time the parent realizes, oh, this is not good, I should do something about this, then it's more difficult. If you wait till a child is 5, 6, 7, 10 years old, but if you wait until the child is 10 years old, you're going to have a very difficult time changing that child's behavior in a more positive sort of way. So this is why it's important that, yes, parents need to seriously think about this, plan for this, have a plan for this, basically the moment the child is born, so that they can cultivate all of these positive qualities and attributes in the child. And then, of course, as a parent, you'll see this. You'll see that, yes, my child is peaceful and happy and wise and obedient. Not obedient meaning a slave to authority, but they have self-discipline. They can control themselves, etc. They, again, know the difference between right and wrong. And it's up to the parent, yes, to monitor this and to see that the child is doing this. And if you see that indeed the child has all of these positive qualities, and as a result, the child is him or herself a very happy, positive child, what more can a parent wish for? I will be very blunt in my answer about this. Yes, that is a very black-pilled sort of approach, and let me just be very blunt about this. It is a non-statement. It is a non-question. It is a non-starter. The reason why is for this reason. Children are going to be brought into this world regardless of what people say or think or believe, or regardless of the conditions around them. Children are born every second. There are going to be children born anyway. So that being the case, no one is going to stop the birth of more children, and more, it's very unfortunate that, and I've seen this, I've known some people who think this way, that, oh, the world is so terrible, why bring children into the world and make the world even more terrible, or submit my child to such a terrible place. Interestingly, those tend to be the people who themselves are more sensitive to the conditions of the world around them, who have, let's say, a more sophisticated approach to ethics, morality, etc. And those are exactly the people who should be bringing children into the world. It's precisely the people who worry about the world, the people who actually think, the people who have the ability to observe what's happening around them. Those are the people who indeed should be bringing children into the world. Why is this the case? Well, again, because they are more intelligent, because they are more perceptive about what's happening around them, and thus, those are the people who, given the proper guidance, who will know how to raise their children properly and will have wonderful children. I mean, who better to bring children into the world? The people who look around them and are clueless and don't have any concern about anything, ethical, moral, social, justice-wise, etc. Should those people be bringing children into the world? I guarantee they will be. Or should it especially be the ones who are a little bit more thoughtful? Yes, it should be the thoughtful people actually bringing children into the world, because they're going to be good parents. It's not guaranteed. Again, they need to get rid of the black-pilled perspective. Negative people don't make for good parents. They need to change that, number one. There's no excuse for being black-pilled. Being black-pilled is simply a type of intellectual lethargy. It's an intellectual laziness when you are just negative all the time. So such people, number one, have to rid themselves of this intellectual lethargy, this laziness of being black-pilled. They need to start seeing the world in a positive, spiritual sort of way. And those are the people especially who should have children, the ones who are more intelligent. Definitely. Well, the primary purpose of childhood itself is growth. That is the primary purpose. And let me say that with the Vedic perspective, what constitutes a child is somewhat different from, let's say, the modern Western perspective. And I have to make this very clear, the modern Western perspective. The truth of the matter is, most of the ancients would agree with what I'm about to say in a short time to directly answer the question. That includes ancient European peoples. They pretty much completely agreed with what I'm about to say. First of all, again, the idea of childhood itself is this is the stage in which an individual is growing in every way from the moment that they arise from the womb. In fact, arguably, when they're in the womb, they're obviously growing. They're obviously developing everything, their brain and their body and their tissues and everything. So, quite literally, from conception until they finally reach that stage of adulthood, the idea is that they should be growing physically. They should be growing health-wise. They should be growing, certainly, again, morally. They have to truly know the difference between right and wrong and how they are to act in such a way that they are ethical beings. They have to grow mentally, intellectually. They have to grow spiritually, especially. This was the idea, of course, of the Gurukula system, is that a child would eventually go to the Gurukula and also learn spiritually how to grow. So this is the stage of growth. Now, interestingly, as far as the stages within that stage of childhood, again, the modern idea is something very different from the ancient idea. In the modern idea, you basically have a child as first a baby, then a toddler, then a child proper, then a teenager, and then eventually an adult. And what signals in the modern Western world that a child finally is an adult? It tends to be the silliest of things. It tends to be that, oh, they're, let's say, 18 and they can smoke now. They're 18 and they can drink now. This is in America. They're 18, now they can vote. And, I'm sorry, actually to drink, I believe in most states you have to be 21. So in some cases it's, they're 21 now they can drink alcohol, now they're an adult. So it tends to be this shallow criteria for determining when a child is no longer a child and is now an adult. It tends to be centered around hedonism, basically. And of course this is very modern and nonsensical. It's meaningless. It's a consumerist-oriented sort of demarcation of child versus adult, and it's truly meaningless. Rather, with the ancient world, the idea was quite different. And in fact, let me just say several things. First of all, of course, we've heard this Vedic adage that there are essentially 3 stages in a child's life, and as Vaishnavas, as Vedic people, I'm sure you've heard this. And it's roughly that when you have a child, from the time that the child is born until roughly around 5 years old or so, the idea is that you treat the child like a king or queen. In other words, yes, that's the time to spoil them, just make sure they have all their needs met, you give them what they need, etc., etc. Then the second stage. In the second stage, rather than treating them like a king or queen, now it's said, now you treat them like a servant. In other words, now is the time for things to get serious. So starting from around the age of 5 on, that's when the child goes to school. That's when the child has to learn and to grow and to do all of the difficult things that they need to do to, again, like I said before, grow in every way, physically, mentally, intellectually, spiritually, morally, etc. So that's the tough stage. And this kind of corresponds with what's even done in modern times. It's around the age of 5 that, of course, a child now they have to go to school every day. Now life becomes tougher, etc. And then finally, at roughly, and again, it varies from the age of 15 or 16, something like that. With the third stage, now you treat the child as a friend. In other words, now the child is an adult, is considered to be an adult. So those are the 3 stages. So first you treat the child as a king or queen, then you treat them as a servant, and then you treat them as a friend. So again, this is how most of the ancients did things as far as raising their children. Now, that being said, there are a few important caveats that I have to throw in here that might be interesting to people. People talk about the teenager stage all the time, being a teenager. And, they'll mourn for each other. Parents will mourn for each other. Oh, you've got a teenager now. Oh, life is going to be tough. Oh, your teenager is going to rebel now, and you're going to have to chase them, and they're going to start drinking alcohol and going crazy, going wild, etc., etc. It's interesting that most people don't know this, actually. But the idea of being a teenager, of teenagehood, and again, all of these connotations that go along with, oh, once you're a teenager, you do A, B, C, you do all these negative things. People are not aware that the concept of being a teenager is very recent. This didn't really catch on until the 1950s. And it's always amazing to me how almost nobody knows this. People just assume that all throughout history there was this category called teenager. And that's not the case. It was actually a very, very modern thing. It was created by marketers, by ad men, in order to market consumer goods to this made-up group, this made-up age group of individuals who they started calling teenagers. That is literally the origin of this term and concept of being a so-called teenager. Previous to roughly the 50s, there was no such thing as being a teenager. That term wasn't really used in any way. So the idea is that indeed you went from being a child to being an adult, and there wasn't really a transition between the two. So it's roughly around the age of 15, 16, and again, it will vary, that you're no longer considered to be a child, you're considered to be an adult, and this is why things were done much earlier in the past. People tended to get married earlier, have children, start families a little bit earlier, etc. But again, there's no hard and fast rule about this. There really isn't. These are general guidelines. It's not that, oh my Lord, people have to be married by the age of 16 or something like that. No, there are no hard or fast rules. But it's generally the idea that at that point, by the time you're 15 or 16 years old, yes, you should be thinking like an adult. You should be thinking responsibly and very ethically, etc. You should be someone who, at this point, is emotionally mature. And again, traditionally, in traditional societies, this would indeed be the time that a person would begin to seriously work, whether it was on the farm or go out and get a job in the world, and with the idea of eventually establishing a career, etc. So yes, it's around that age, 15 or 16, that a person really is no longer considered to be a child. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And in fact, let me just say about that also. This idea that, oh, when you're a teenager, that is the natural time. People just think that these two things go together like hand in glove. That, oh, you're a teenager, now is the time to party. Now is the time to start drinking and taking drugs and having illicit sex, etc. This also, just like the idea of teenagehood, is an extremely modern idea. People just have this unfortunate notion that, oh, this was always the case, that people always thought this way 100 years, 500 years ago. No. This is a misperception that has come about just in the last maybe 40 years or so. This idea that, oh, if you're a teenager, naturally you're going to start drinking and smoking and doing all these things. No, this is very recent. And in the past, again, the idea was that, no, there isn't any specific time when it's good for you to just lead a hedonistic life and go partying. And in fact, if anything, let me say, for traditional societies, it was the opposite as far as being a so-called teenager. It is especially during this very formative time in your life, when you're still developing, that if anything, you absolutely should not be doing anything illicit like this. You should not be ingesting any kind of drugs, legal or illegal. You should not be smoking. You should not be drinking, because your body, your mind, your brain, everything that you are is still very much developing. And arguably, what to speak of the idea that, oh, when you're a teenager, this is the time to be hedonistic. No, it's the opposite. That's precisely the time not to be hedonistic. Because what you end up doing is, again, just harming yourself in such a way that you're not going to grow properly. Your health is not going to grow properly. You're not even going to be as healthy, as strong as you would otherwise. No, it's exactly as you are a child up until at least 20 years old, 21, that you should not ever touch such substances. In fact, of course, I would argue that at no point in your life do you ever need to touch such substances. You should never drink or do drugs or smoke or anything like this, but especially when you're a teenager. This is true for video games as well. I mean, there have been studies that have shown that children who are raised on screens end up just being developmentally disabled, socially disabled. There are hundreds of studies that have shown this. This is not something that's disputable, where it's been shown that if you have a child and from the time that they're literally a child, you just give them screens to play with and let them play with video games and let them have cell phones and just stare at screens, watching movies all the time, watching TV. No, this is something that is developmentally disabling for children. So no, it's especially when a person is a child that they should lead as pure a life as possible and have nothing but healthy things coming into them, coming into their mouth as far as food and drink, coming into their senses. They should only be seeing and hearing the most positive things imaginable that are going to help them to grow, not the opposite. Sure. Yeah, this is indeed an extremely important issue, actually, more so than most people even understand, and it is something that needs to be addressed. First of all, interestingly, as far as being overprotective, what I find is that parents are not overprotective enough. And it's interesting how they will claim that they're overprotective, and this is why they want to give their children screens so that they'll fit in with society. The truth of the matter is, if parents truly were overprotective, if they were truly protective of their children, they would not let them have any screens at all. So if anything, these are lazy parents who allow their children to have screens, to have phones and video games and television, etc. So this is, it's actually the very opposite of the case. And it is indeed true. I've actually seen this myself, quite literally with my own eyes. I mean, I know children who, when they were constantly allowed to have screens and to play video games, whether something as innocent as Minecraft or other sorts of more violent games or anything like that, I've seen with my own eyes, children who are addicted to screens, yes, they're practically autistic. You're correct. They don't know how to communicate with others. They have tantrums all the time. They are emotionally disabled. They can't control their emotions. They can't control their thoughts. I have with my own eyes seen children who, because they're constantly on games, doing things with screens, they almost seem to lack the ability to think discursively. They can react, but they can't really think. I've seen that myself. And then I have seen these same children where finally the parents wake up and they say, all right, no more video games for you. That's it. No more screens. You're not going to see a screen again, ever. Within weeks, those children become normal. Within weeks, the parents are in shock that now suddenly the children go from being a child who's wild-eyed and can barely even make eye contact with them to now suddenly they have intelligence in their eyes. It's like a spark is finally there, and their behavior gets better, and their focus is better, and they don't have as many emotional tantrums. Those little by little begin to disappear, etc. So, the point being, yes, the studies have shown this, and I've seen it with my own eyes, that this is the case. You take these screens away from a child, and they go from being uncontrollable, where they have no self-control, to suddenly being human, being truly human. So yes, screens are something that I recommend to all parents that they do not allow their children ever to play with. And I mean ever. I mean, it's not a matter of, oh yes, let them play a video game once in a while. Would you allow your 5-year-old to smoke a cigarette once in a while? Oh, but it's just one cigarette a week. What parent would do that? If something is poison, it's poison. It's not a matter of, oh, well, but it's just a little bit of poison. I'm only allowing them to have the poison once a week. No, again, this is why I say, if anything, parents are not protective enough. A truly protective parent would not say, oh, it's fine for my my 5-year-old to have just one little shot of vodka once a week. One cigarette once a week. Oh, let them take this drug, that drug once a week. Oh, it's all right. No, of course it's not. If you are responsible for a child, if you're a parent, at no point should you allow your child to have any of these substances ever, and no excuse. The same thing with screens, the same thing with, again, video games, cell phones, smartphones, playing little games on the smartphone, just staring at screens. I tell parents at no point should you allow your child to play one video game, period. And I challenge them. I say, see the difference. You really want to go on and on about how, but my child is going to be so different from all the children around him. Actually, you're correct. Your child is going to be different from all the other children around him and all his friends. He is going to be different. He's going to be more intelligent. And he's going to be more self-controlled. And he's going to be less emotionally debilitated. He's not going to have tantrums all the time and crying fits and bouts of anger, etc. You are going to have a child who, yes, is quite different from the other children around you. You're going to have a child who's peaceful. You're going to have a child who's intelligent. You're going to have a child who knows how to think, who can do mathematics, who can think logically, who can think reasonably, who can do actual discursive thought. See, this is the main thing. I've used this term before. When a child stares at screens all the time, they lose the ability to engage in what is called discursive thought. In other words, thought is always there. Even for the most intellectually ungifted person on the planet, there's still thought that's involved. That person still is thinking, but it's more of a reactive sort of thinking. It's more of a, I like this, I don't like that sort of thought. That's not discursive thought. What discursive thought means is the ability to creatively and logically engage the intellect in such a way that you can independently figure things out, to state it in very layman terms. That's discursive thought. A child who stares at screens too much loses that ability to have discursive thought, that is, to actually think, and thus do such things as mathematics, thinking logically, problem solving, etc. Being truly creative in an intellectual sort of way, come up with new ideas, etc. So this is why I would say to parents who worry that, my children, though, if they don't play video games and all the other children are, they're going to be so different. Yes, you're right, they're going to be better. And what parent in their right mind, unless they are so indoctrinated and brainwashed by the idea of radical egalitarianism to the point where they're scared to death that their child might appear better than other people, might actually be intellectually superior, other than someone who is mentally debilitated like that, what parent does not want their child to grow maximally, to be extremely intelligent, very peaceful, very much in control, very focused, very good, very ethical, etc., etc., very courteous? What parent does not want that? So this is why I say to parents who worry about this, that, we're going to stand out as freaks if I have one of these children who actually has control over his life. That's a good thing to be. That's not a freak. That's called being successful as a person. So if you want your child to be successful as a person, don't worry about what the other kids are doing. Let them play with the video games. I mean, it's sad. Ideally, everyone should stop playing video games. But if other parents are not intelligent enough to know, no, keep your children away from negative, harmful things. Are we to copy them? Of course not. Let's say we lived in a culture where for some reason, yes, it was the standard that at the age of 5, all children start drinking vodka, and thus destroying themselves, destroying their liver, destroying their minds. And this is the society I live in. At the age of 5, everyone starts drinking vodka. Am I going to allow my child to start drinking vodka at the age of 5 just so that I don't stand out? How silly is that? Absolutely silly. No, let me stand out. Let my child stand out. It's the people who stand out who are the leaders. It's the people who stand out who are the people who actually accomplish things of greatness in this world. So don't be afraid to stand out. Just stand out for something that is true, that is good, that is beneficial, that is positive. But if anything, when you're living in a society that itself is degenerate, oh, stand out, be different, think different, and have your child do the same. Parents who are not as intellectually sophisticated as they should be will often bring up this argument that, oh yes, if I don't allow my children to be like all the other children and yes, waste their time with video games, etc., that yes, they won't be like other children, so as a result they'll be lonely, etc. Isn't it so interesting how the very opposite is the case? They're making the argument that in order for my child to socialize and get along well with other children and other people, they should stare at a screen rather than talk to other children and other people. It's an amazing argument that some people try to make. No, the best way to socialize your child is socially, not by staring at a screen. The best way to socialize your child, to have them interact with other people, with other children, and thus know what it means to be with other people and to act in a way that's positive and constructive, etc., it's not by staring at a screen and playing Minecraft. It is instead by, again, socializing physically with other people and having face-to-face conversations, etc. That's the first thing. The other thing is, let me say this, going indeed a little bit deeper into the psychology of this and the psychology of the idea of parents not wanting to disappoint their children and thus allowing their children to do anything that they want, with the idea that, oh my God, if I don't allow my child to do everything that they want, yes, they're going to be upset and they're not going to be happy, and oh, how do I deal with this, etc. This brings up a much greater issue that we have to talk about a little bit, and that is what child rearing has become in modernity. And again, in modernity, the idea of how you raise a child is first radically different from what it was previous to 50, 60 years ago, number one. Number two, it is in most cases quite literally the opposite of reality, the opposite of good advice, the opposite of what people should be doing. And interestingly, while there are several sources that you could say as to why this sort of idea has arisen, in the Western world, there was one person very specifically, an author. His name was Dr. Benjamin Spock. And he began writing, I believe, in the late 1940s, something like that. And I can't think of the name of the book, but I know he wrote a book that became very famous. It sold millions of copies. And this book became, unfortunately, very sadly, the Bible of how to raise children, both among parents, but among many different sorts of adults in authority, teachers, etc. And many books from that moment until now have followed in the same footsteps of, unfortunately, teaching quite literally the very opposite of how you should raise children. And let me just say several things about this without going very in depth, because truthfully, we could go very in depth into precisely what it is that's being taught today in classrooms, in books, videos, etc., by so-called authorities who really are not, by psychiatrists, psychologists, child psychologists. There's so many things that are taught today that are the opposite, literally the opposite of what a parent should be doing to raise their child. But there are several things that I've noticed in the last several generations. Again, basically since this person, Dr. Benjamin Spock, began writing his books. The first thing is, parents today practically fear their children. They're afraid of their children, and I've seen this. And let me explain what I mean by this. They are afraid of everything. They are afraid that if they say or do the slightest thing to get their child upset, they're going to traumatize their child for life. Number one, that is absolutely not true whatsoever. No, as parents, we are tasked with guiding our children in the right way. And that means even if they emotionally disagree, even if we say to them, oh, you must eat your vegetables, and they don't want to eat their vegetables, and they get very angry and emotional, no, we have to have them eat their vegetables regardless of their reaction to that. And we have to not have this fear that we're somehow traumatizing them. As long as we're guiding them with two things, love and wisdom. If we're guiding them with love and wisdom, we don't have to worry about traumatizing them. We don't have to worry that, oh, if I tell my child to do something, the smallest thing, and they disagree and they don't want to do it, oh, now my child is going to be traumatized for life and is going to have to see a psychiatrist for the rest of their life. That is absolute nonsense. Again, as long as we raise that child with love and wisdom together, then that will not be the case. So we have to lose this fear that we're going to somehow harm our children if we try to raise them to do the right thing. The other thing is we have to stop fearing our children themselves. And let me explain what I mean by this. This is another, unfortunately, debilitating false idea that Benjamin Spock and contemporary writers today have given us as far as child rearing. And that is that our children are equal to us, and that their opinions matter as much as any adult, etc. That is the opposite of what is true. In order to raise a child properly, we have to understand that what that means is we are the role model. We are the leader. The child does not have knowledge. And as a result, they may have their opinion based upon their extremely limited amount of knowledge mixed with their uncontrolled desire. But their opinion means nothing. We are the ones who are wise. We are the ones who are adults. We are the ones who have gone through decades of experience, and as a result we must not be afraid to be in a leadership role with our child, and that is that we don't allow our children to speak back and to rebel against us when we know that you're 6 years old. No, I know that if you had your choice, you would eat nothing but candy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Yes, I know that's your so-called opinion. It's a non-opinion. I am the adult. I understand nutrition. I understand that if you do that, you're not going to have teeth. And you're going to have diabetes by the time that you're 10 years old, and on and on. Yes, so we must lead. We must not be afraid to tell our children, this is what you're going to do, period. Period. There's no debate. There's no discussion about it. There's no democratic vote when you're dealing with a 5, 6, 10, 15-year-old even. So this is very important that we have to understand that we are meant to lead the child. And I have many other things I can talk about along these lines as far as false ideas that people have about being a parent that are literally the opposite. But maybe I'll stop there for now. Personally, I consider such punishment to be indicative of a failure on the part of the parents. See, this is the thing. If the parent truly knows what they're doing as a parent, if they truly have wisdom, if they truly are an example themselves, and if they themselves are consciously parenting, that is, they're not just parenting in such a way where they're just living their lives and the children just happen to be there and they kind of try to parent the child whenever they think about it. No. If they are conscious parents, and that is whenever they're with those children, they're always thinking, let me make sure that everything that I say, that I do, is an example to them. If they're that kind of parent, then harsh punishments should never be necessary. In fact, arguably, if you are a good parent like this, no punishment should really be necessary. As far as extreme punishments like this, yes, it is never excusable, actually, to verbally berate a child. I mean, to explain to them in strong terms what they should do and should not do, sure, that's fine. And people must not mistake speaking to a child in a strong way, in a serious way, versus calling them names, insulting them, berating them, belittling them, saying horrible things to them, oh, you're a loser, something like that. That should never be done under any circumstances, no matter what the child did. What to speak of cursing at them. There are some parents who curse at their children. That to me is unimaginable. But then as far as physical punishment, there's no excuse for beating your child. It doesn't matter what the child has done. Again, if that child has done something so bad that in your mind it should result in beating that child, that is, if anything, more of a reflection on the parent than anything. What kind of parent are you that you serve as such a negative example that your child has done something crazy and horrible? So rather than beating that child, you should use this as an opportunity to reflect upon your own life and what kind of example you have been to that child. But yes, there's never an excuse for beating a child. A parent has to teach by their example as much as possible, and by speaking to the child, and speaking to the child intelligently. Speaking to the child intelligently. I have a son, and he's much older now, but when he was very young, this was the approach I would take with him. If he were like veering toward doing something not right or something like that, or he was supposed to be doing homework, he's not paying attention or something, I would speak with him, but I would speak with him in a serious way. I would make sure that he has eye contact with me. Again, you're in control. As the parent, always understand you're in control. This is another mistake that parents today have made. They allow their children to lead the way. They allow their children to be the authority. They react to their children's actions, and it should be the other way around. Understand that you're in control. So the first thing that I do when I deal with any child, actually, whether it was my own or any other child, if I'm speaking to them about something important, I make sure they look me in the eye. I don't allow them, as I'm talking to them, to just kind of look around, look down. No, look me in the eye. I need to talk to you. Look, I know that you're doing this, and you know it's fun and everything, but no, you're supposed to be doing this instead. You need to focus. And I reason with them. But this is the thing, in a strong way and a non-debatable sort of way. You don't have a discussion or a debate with your child, ever. You rather, again, as the authority, as the person who is in charge, if you are an adult. You see, unfortunately today we have many so-called adults who chronologically, they're in their 20s, but intellectually, emotionally, they themselves are like 12-year-olds, again, due to video games, among other things. But if you are an adult, and if you see yourself as a mature person, and you truly act as a mature person, you're in charge. You're in charge of your children. So if they're doing the wrong thing, you sit them down, you look them in the eye, make sure they make eye contact with you. You don't allow them to speak. Be quiet, you're going to listen. You're doing this, you're supposed to be doing this. This is why you can't do this, so do this now. And you talk to them. And you have to do this consistently. It can't just be when you're at your wit's end. You see, most parenting happens, as I like to say, at the wit's end. Rather than proactively. In other words, a parent will suddenly think of being a parent when there's a crisis. Now suddenly, what do I do? What do I do? No. Be a parent when things are best, not just when things are worst. Always be a parent to your child. Every time you're in the presence of your child. And if you do this, you won't have problems. Your child will not need punishment. Your child will be a very responsible person and respectful. Sure, definitely. Well, several things to be said about this. First, it is indeed important to understand the nature of fads, the nature of how what is acceptable in modern culture is indeed something that's relative, and how what is acceptable, what is relative, is something that is itself different from what is absolute, different from absolute standards, different from reality. So in other words, if a parent indeed has the ability to understand what is actual reality, that is, that gender is real, and that there are only two genders. There are not 50,500 or 50 genders. There are two genders. There's man, there's woman, period. If a parent understands this, if a parent understands that it is important to have traditional values, that is, i.e. values that work, that actually have meaning, that actually have been time-tested for tens of thousands of years, if a parent understands this, then they're not going to allow fads to operate on them whatsoever. You see, interestingly, unfortunately, much of what today in modern liberal democracies are considered to be sacrosanct untouchable sorts of rules of the world are indeed just fads that go back no more than 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, something like that. So this is one perfect example, is the idea of even gender identity. 10 years ago, this was not an issue. 10 years ago, all of these issues that now have come to the forefront of humanity, and people have taken their sides on this, and fanatically so, this was not even an issue 10 years ago, to the point where I always have to point this out to people. People don't really understand this or know this. Even the idea of gay marriage was something that if you went back 10 years ago, even liberals didn't accept this. Many people don't understand that. Just to give one of many, many, many different examples. Even, let's say, someone like Barack Obama, who became president of the United States in 2008. People don't understand that if you go back and you just look at the record, even he was opposed to gay marriage for the first several years that he was president. Again, if you go back a dozen years ago, very few people were in favor of gay marriage. The idea of multiple genders didn't really exist other than in the tiniest fringe of society. The idea that gender is fluid, etc. Well, now, of course, this has become sacrosanct. It has become the religion of our age in the modern world. But it's a fad. 10 years ago, even people who today support these ideas didn't support these ideas, including the major politicians, including Barack Obama and all these people. Hillary Clinton was opposed to even gay marriage just a dozen years ago. Again, people forget this, but it's on the record. So these are fads, and people really have to understand that fads are meaningless. And just because you don't go along with what is a fad in society, this doesn't make you a bad person. On the contrary, it makes you a strong person. It makes you a thoughtful person. It makes you someone who is actually thinking about these things. As far as how to avoid your children being in contact with these various things, yeah, you just do so as thoughtfully as possible. You just do your best that when your child brings this up, you explain to the child why these things are just fads, they're meaningless, it's just the politics of the day. And the same way that all these ideas of gender fluidity and gay marriage, etc., seemingly just came out of nowhere, and it's the big fad today, whereas it wasn't 20, 30, 50 years ago. In the same way, this fad is going to pass. And interestingly, 10 years from now, the very people who are screaming loudest today about gender fluidity and all of these things will be ashamed that those things ever came out of their mouth, and they themselves in 10 years won't admit that they ever even supported these views. That's the thing that is hilarious, that is amazing, that's tragic. The people who are screaming the loudest about how, oh, there are 50 genders, 10 years from now, they'll deny that they said that because they'll seem like such fools. So be the sort of parent who's ahead of your time, if anything, and who today understands that it's just a fad. Go with what is absolute, go with what is traditional, go with what has always worked. All right, take care, namaste.